Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I am Linda Zippo. I am President and CEO of the Center for Nonprofits, and I am so thrilled that you all could join us for Ways Nonprofits Can Champion Equity Through Public Policy. Thanks for taking the time to join us today. With me behind the scenes are the Center for Nonprofits Program Coordinator, Caitlin Giles McCormick, and our Office Administrator, Kathy Hahn. Before I turn things over to today's fantastic panel, I would like to give a brief introduction and make a couple of announcements. For those of you who are not familiar with the Center for Nonprofits, we are New Jersey's statewide network and champion for the nonprofit community. We have strengthened New Jersey's nonprofits individually and collectively since 1982 in order to improve the quality of life for all the people of our state. Our programs include advocacy, education, professional training, expert information and referral, member programs, and much more. If your organization is a member of the center, we thank you for your support and involvement as we work on this together. If you're not a member, we hope you'll consider joining. Membership offers access to a wide array of benefits, and it helps to amplify the collective voice of our state's nonprofits. If you join by June 30th, 2021, you can save 10% off your annual dues, and that will be good through July of 2022, so you get a free month if you use the discount code JUG handle when you enroll. Please feel free to contact us for additional information or to visit our website to find out more. A couple of other announcements before we get started. Thank you to all of you who have completed the Center's Salary, Benefits, and Diversity Survey for New Jersey's nonprofit community. This is a really important way for us to track not only compensation practices in the sector, but also diversity and equity practices in nonprofits. If you complete the survey, you will get a free copy of the compensation and benefits report when it is released later this year. And we will also be using this information to release a separate nonprofit diversity report, which will be freely available to the public free of charge. So we've extended the deadline until June 14th. So please take a moment or a few moments to complete it. It can be how long it will take will depend on your staff size and some other factors, but we do hope you'll take the time to complete it. If you happen to be looking for a job in the nonprofit community, the Center for Nonprofits is hiring. We have an immediate opening for a manager of technology and research. You can find this position announcement on our website. We'll put the post links in the chat, and we'll send follow-up information as well. If you are not looking but know somebody who might be, feel free to pass this information along. And we hope you will join our small, mighty, and we think fabulous staff team. This webinar is just one way in which nonprofits can and should be working to advance equity, not only in our sector, but more broadly in society. But just by way of a reminder, as a 501c3 nonprofit, this is work that you can do. Don't let anybody tell you differently. As a 501c3 public charity, you can engage in advocacy without limit. You can do lobbying, influencing legislation, as long as it's an insubstantial part of your activities. And you can do all sorts of other things like nonpartisan voter engagement kinds of activities and much more. You just have to stay clear of partisan politics or electioneering. If you want more information about what you can do or other guidance or much more detail, contact the center and we would be happy to provide that. It is now my privilege and pleasure to turn things over to our amazing panel of advocates and leaders and champions in this field. Joining us today are Sara Cullinane, director and co-founder of Make the Road New Jersey, Andrea McChristian, a law and public policy director at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice, Brandon McCoy, president of New Jersey Policy Perspective, and our moderator, Kiki Jamieson, president of the Fund for New Jersey. We are recording today's session, so you will receive a link to the recording. It will actually be up on YouTube in the not too distant future, within the next couple of days. And you'll also receive copies of the slides or any handouts that are provided. We are, as I said, we're not only recording it, but if you have questions, there is time reserved later for Q&A, but put your questions in the chat box, and we or our panel will get to them as we're able. And if we can't get to them, we will do our best to follow up afterward. I think that's it. I think we're good to go. Kiki, would you like to take things away?
Thanks very much, Linda. I think you've done everything that needed to be done to start us off. And welcome to these fabulous panelists. I'm really proud to work at the Fund for New Jersey, an organization that partners with each of the organizations represented here today. Our order of business is that we'll hear first from Brandon McCoy, next from Sara Cullinane, and third from Andrea McChristian. Each speaker will take about 10 minutes to provide an overview, and I hope you'll take Linda's invitation to put your questions in the chat. We're looking forward to having a really lively discussion. So without further ado, Brandon.
Thank you very much, Kiki. Thank you, everybody. Great to be with you this afternoon. Again, my name is Brandon McCoy. I'm the president of New Jersey Policy Perspective. For those who don't know us, we are a think and do tank that really centers on trying to advance policies that will make New Jersey a great place to live for everybody, regardless of who they are. And we focus particularly on tax and budget policy, but also healthcare policy, immigration, economic security, and a host of other areas. So I really have 10 minutes here, so I'm really gonna probably speed through this a little bit, but I wanted to share with you a bit today about championing equity through public policy. Is my slides are up, everything looks cool, yeah. And so just generally speaking, I think this is actually a pretty prescient moment, or rather convenient moment to be having this conversation. When you look back at the past year plus that we have been through, it is not difficult to see the many ways that the policies that we have in place throughout this state and this nation led to some significant disparities in how people experienced both the pandemic and the recession. These disparities are not an accident. They happen because of policies that engender or deprive access and affordability to various programs and resources. And so just specifically looking at the COVID impact specifically here, you can see that the case rate, hospitalization rate, and mortality rate for non-white communities was disproportionately higher, right? And this is, New Jersey is a good place to look at this because we are such a diverse state. We're a very segregated state, but we're still very diverse. And when you see these types of disparities in New Jersey, you know that something's very, very wrong. And obviously, this is not the first time we've seen this type of thing. It's just the most recent. And even with COVID being a very significant and massive crisis that affected everybody, in a very dramatic way, there are crises throughout this country every single day, just at a smaller scale. Housing crises, healthcare crises, employment crises, you name it. And so COVID was just one that really, captured our attention for good reason, but understanding that this, comes from a lot of existing disparities is really important. And so when we look at why did this happen the way it did? Well, the fact of the matter is that a lot of the things that you will look to for New Jersey to invest in to prevent these types of disparities, we've done a poor job of over the past decade plus. When you look at our state budget, which is basically, for us at NJPP, we view the state budget as a moral document. It should, take into account and provide the resources necessary to ensure every New Jerseyan has, the ability to thrive, regardless of who they are. Again, when you look at how this state addressed the last recession we had, the Great Recession coming out of 2008, 2009, we took a strategy of dramatic cuts, budget cuts, program cuts, significant austerity. And we went from a budget of about $41 billion in 2008 to just a little under 33 billion in 2011. That's basically 20% of the budget. That's significant. That is really pulling back in a major way in a very short period of time. And we are just now, we don't have the governor's budget proposal for this year on this graph here, But, if it goes through in the way that he is hoping it will by the end of this month, we will just now be getting back to our pre-pandemic levels of budgeting and funding. So New Jersey pulled back. That meant cuts to education. That meant cuts to healthcare programs, cuts to transportation, all the things necessary for people to, have a successful, day-to-day existence in the state of New Jersey. And that wasn't random. That wasn't somehow shocking. Those were purposeful decisions that we saw, which were the result of tax and budget choices that prioritize the already very well-to-do. We sunset the millionaire's tax back in 2010 or 2009 rather. We cut the corporate business tax. We, phased out the estate tax, which only affected a very small handful of the wealthiest New Jerseyans to begin with. And we cut the sales tax by a quarter of a penny, which for you and I saves us about $80 a year, but for the very wealthy saves them quite a bit more. And that 1/3 of a penny alone reduced the state budget revenues by over $600 million. So there's a lot of things we could do with that money. We've lost out on a total of nearly $15 billion cumulatively. We will have by the time we get to the end of next fiscal year. And that really set us back. And a way that we can focus on how that set us back in particular, again, going back to where those investments, where were those investments and where did they come from when we cut? Well, this is where they came from specifically. You look at the size of government overall, or the investment in government overall went down, but particularly in the departments that we looked to help us get through this pandemic, Department of Health funding was down 54% over that time. Our Department of Community Affairs funding was down 42%. Even the Treasury, you see, funding was down 45%. Those cuts don't come without consequences. Even if you look at labor and workforce development, funding was relatively flat, but when we look at staffing levels, you see a lot of reductions in staffing. This is staffing across all of state government in New Jersey, including executive branch, going back to 1999. And you see we're at the lowest levels we've ever been. And so it's hard to expect, departments that exist in the public interest to meet the moment when they don't have the resources necessary to do so. And that has equity implications. We cannot realize equity. We cannot deal with the disparities that exist in our society when the institution that is meant to work on behalf of everyone is undermined constantly. Now, we have options to sort of reverse this trend, and some of these things have already taken place over the past few years. We have restored a version of the millionaire's tax. We have done a recapture of a health insurance assessment here. And so you see, I think number one is the millionaire's tax estimate. Number four is the health insurance assessment estimate. But there's other options that we could go to really address the fact that, running austerity budgets, running, the state on the concept of trickle-down economics has led to calamity and disaster for far too many people. And it resulted in New Jersey being the slowest state to emerge from the recession 10 years ago, and set us further behind than we needed to be coming into this crisis. Now, we've done better because we've made significant investments over the past few years. We have passed, pro-family, pro-labor policies like a $15 minimum wage, like paid sick leave, like paid family leave that will help sort of blunt the damage that we would have seen otherwise. But still, COVID is going to be a massive, massive setback for the state, even in the best circumstance. So thankfully, we do have a federal government right now that is taking an active role and being an active partner in helping states navigate, what this recovery looks like. And now we have New Jersey is receiving $6 billion in funds. That's $6 billion for a second there. $6 billion in federal funds that we get to sort of, portion and disperse over the next 3 years to figure out how do we want to address some of the setbacks that we saw. But still, part of the problem with budgeting and how budgeting has been pursued recently is that it is pursued over a 12-month period. It's pursued with a 12-month horizon. And that's short-term thinking. That doesn't get us where we need to be. We need to think further. We need to think long-term. Where do we want the state of New Jersey to be in the year 2030? What does that require of us now? That requires certain investments to be made today so that we can enjoy the fruits of those investments, down the line. And so I would like to direct you to this resource, which has been one of my personal Bibles for the past couple of years, which is Advancing Racial Equity with State Tax Policy. It's a report by the Center on Budget and Policy Priorities, which is a think tank in Washington, D.C. that does tremendous work. But a lot of people don't really think about tax policy or budgets when they think about equity. They just don't. And that's a problem, because if it's not in the budget, then it doesn't exist. If the funding isn't there, then you should not expect to see real gains. And so even though we can pass policies all day long, if the resources are not there to support that policy being made whole, then we can't expect too much. And you see that, again, perfect example is Department of Labor. And you have folks looking for their unemployment insurance, and Department of Labor does not have the capacity to actually deliver on that as quickly as we all want them to. And so I'll close quickly with, today, just today, we see these statistics showing that just from the stimulus checks alone, over the past year, we've seen a 42% decline in food shortages for families with children, 43% decline in a common gauge of financial instability, and a 20+% decline in anxiety and depression. That is what happens when we have everyone understanding the power of investment, understanding the power of community, understanding that we can make investments to help people deal with the trauma and calamity in their lives, and not having a mindset of, sort of austerity, but having a mindset of charity. And so we need to do more to push for government to actually invest in the assets and the programs that can make our communities whole. And so one thing that NJPP has done is, if you Google search or you go to our website, NJPP Blueprint, we just released a blueprint to secure a just recovery that we worked on with a ton of partners, including the Institute for Social Justice, including Make the Road, to focus on 65 policies that we think are really crucial for the next 4 years in New Jersey to come out of this moment in a variety of areas, as you can see. And this blueprint is actually partnered, or rather combined with an interactive tool called the State of Opportunity Index that you can go, it's on our website again under publications, and you can click around the state, click around different counties and get information. Now, this data is going to be pre-pandemic data, but it's nice to have this because it'll give us a snapshot of New Jersey prior to the pandemic. And then when we update this next year, we can see where, how far we've come, how far we have to go. But please make use of those tools. And the one thing I would really sort of like to drive home here is just that, all of these policies work together. You cannot think about health policy without thinking about climate policy, without thinking about immigration, without thinking about housing. What we do over here affects what happens over there. And if we want to be holistic in our approach to policy and having an equitable mindset and wanting to advance the values of equity, justice, and liberty, we have to take this seriously. And so when sometimes you'll have folks say, oh, I really care about equity and justice, but I don't want to talk about taxes. That's the wrong mindset. Taxes are central to labor policy, are central to criminal justice policy, so on and so forth. And so let's bring down, the walls, let's bring down the siloing of policy, and let's work, more in concert and in partnership and togetherness to address the problems that are facing our state. And I thank you for your time.
Thanks very much, Brandon. Sara, we'd love to hear from you.
Thank you so much, Kiki. Hi, Brandon. Hi, Andrea. It's great to be here with you all. And thank you so much, Linda, and to the Center for hosting us. It's great to be back and to engage in this dialogue. My name is Sara Cullinane. I'm the director of Make the Road New Jersey. We are a grassroots organization whose mission is to build the power of immigrant and working class communities to achieve dignity and respect. And today I'm going to share my screen, and I'm going to share for folks who joined us in this last conversation, this is sort of an update of where we are on two really important central campaigns for our organization. And what I want to do today is talk a little bit about why it's so important to engage in policy work for equity, and how we get there, how we achieve these policies is almost just as important as winning or passing these policies. I'll step back a little bit and share a little bit about the organization, and then talk about some of the some of the campaigns that we've been working on this year in the middle of the pandemic. And first, I'm going to figure out how to share my screen. All right, I think that worked. So Make the Road New Jersey, again, builds a tower of immigrant and working class communities to achieve dignity and respect. And we do that through community organizing, through the provision of high quality legal and support services, transformative education and policy innovation. We started in November of 2014, and we operate centers in Elizabeth and Passaic and satellite hubs in Perth Amboy and Newark. And, you know, at our organizing, this is sort of the pre-pandemic Make the Road. Every week, 400 people come together across 6 different committees to work on different issues: immigrant rights, workers' rights, youth, and leadership skills. And, you know, our members that join together in these committees are immigrant and working class folks of color who come after a long day of work or come in during school, after school, to get support on college access and their homework. And our organization is driven by the vision, the power, the strength, and the creativity of the community members that have joined Make the Road. And so as we take on campaigns, as we provide services, our members' interests and ideas and initiatives are what drive our work. So, you know, every year we have a leadership school where hundreds of individuals participate in a very intensive 10-week program to learn about how policies get made, how our political and legislative systems work, and how our, and popular education around how different systems of oppression work in our country and in our state. Our members vote on campaigns that we're going to take on. So every year we come together in a membership assembly, and all of the committees that have been meeting through the year propose different campaigns to take on, and our members, who are immigrant working class folks of all ages, come together to vote on their priorities for the year. And this is key to our work. We know that policies are more effective when they're designed, won, and implemented by the people whom those policies are most affecting. And we see the role of member leadership in our organization impacting the very design of the policies that we fight for, the very design of the programs that we are promoting and implementing. And this leadership plays out into our staff. Almost all of our organizing staff are initially joined the organization as members and then became leaders and then joined as staff. And we see that as really key to the development of our organization, that the leadership pipeline begin from day one at membership and member engagement. So I'll share now the story of 2 campaigns that we've been working on for now more than a year. And, you know, again, these are campaigns, one led by sort of the broad membership and another led by our youth members. That really are about advancing equity and survival among immigrant and working class community members. The first is a Recovery for All campaign. So as many of you know, immigrants who are undocumented, there are 500,000 in New Jersey. They've been left behind from almost every form of relief. Stimulus checks that Brandon was referring to: if you don't have immigration status, you're not eligible. Even U.S. citizen children of immigrants who are undocumented were ineligible for stimulus checks, and spouses in the first round. Unemployment, undocumented immigrants are ineligible for unemployment, even though they have paid more than $1 billion into the system over the past 10 years. Basic safety net programs like food stamps and TANF are inaccessible for undocumented immigrants here in New Jersey. So as the pandemic hit, we know that immigrants were hit incredibly hard as frontline workers who went out to work every single day to provide the essential labor to keep the rest of New Jersey safe. And they were also hard hit in sectors where there were high levels of unemployment during the quarantine, such as retail and restaurants. And as they were ineligible for unemployment insurance, we saw folks waiting on bread lines, unable to pay rent, unable to provide for their families, pay their bills, put food on the table, pay for medicine, and putting themselves in risky situations because they had no choice but to go out to work, even if they were exposing themselves to the virus. So our members launched a campaign called Recovery for All back in, it must have been April 2020, to push the state, well, first the federal government, and we did not have a lot of success there, to provide aid to anyone that was excluded from relief. They fought hard. Before we could go outside, our members, we took photos of our members to Trenton to push for inclusion in different relief packages. Members staged actions in front of employers where they were deprived of basic safety protections. This is Carmen Torres, who was fired after she spoke up about being denied protective equipment. She got sick from COVID. She was fired after she spoke up, and this is an action we held to support her. And we built a campaign to push the state to provide relief, and took our fight to the State House in an encampment over the summer where immigrant families slept out on the lawn to push our state legislature to pass legislation that would provide one-time payments to undocumented people left behind from relief. They rallied, they marched in the streets and on bicycles, blocked traffic to gain attention in front of the governor's press conference, and had a march on marking International Women's Day where more than 350 immigrant essential workers who are women came out to push the state to provide relief. We wrote reports based on the experience and surveys of 225 undocumented immigrants, showing the impact of lack of relief on their families and on their health and on their households. And we found devastating impacts on their communities, on their families, on their children. 80% reported being unable to provide medication or for basic needs in their household. And 3 out of 5 were more than 4 months behind on rent, and that was just 6 months into the pandemic. We also engaged in different types of organizing. Our members held roundtables with any legislator that would meet with them to talk about the importance of access to relief. They held rallies. They built coalition with different organizations, faith, labor, community. We worked with public health experts, including former commissioners of health from New Jersey that wrote a letter in support, making the public health argument of why it's so important to extend aid. Groups that represent survivors of domestic violence, many of whom have been adversely impacted by the pandemic, and even worse so when they had no access to aid. And we also engaged voters. We called 180,000 registered voters of color in New Jersey across party lines to urge them to take action. And as a nonprofit, we can do this as nonpartisan civic engagement, and really tried to build out as broad of a coalition as possible to push. And even marking St. Patrick's Day. And as we were unsuccessful in passing legislation out of the legislature, and as states around us, including New York, Washington State, California, started to pass really incredible relief packages, we took the fight to the next level. Our members decided to launch a fast. Initially, they thought they would only do it for a few days, and they ended up fasting for 24 days. We were joined by Dolores Huerta and our fast, and by faith and community leaders from across the country. And finally, at the end of the fast, we were able to win a really landmark victory that's a first step towards relief. And it's called the Excluded New Jerseyans Fund. So on May 7th, Governor Murphy announced the Excluded New Jerseyans Fund, which will provide $40 million in aid to any New Jerseyan who's low income that's been excluded from all types of federal relief. So not only undocumented immigrants qualify, but also individuals who may have been excluded because they're returning citizens or because they're so low income they weren't able to, they didn't pay taxes and didn't receive the stimulus. And so the fund, which is not yet open, but should open in the next couple of months, will provide relief in the form of $1,000 to $2,000 payments to individuals that are low income, that have been left behind from relief and impacted by the pandemic. And while this is a victory, it is only a partial victory and really insufficient to meet the need. We anticipate that the fund will only reach about 10% of all individuals. And so we're continuing our fight. Tomorrow we'll be back at the State House pushing the legislature to use some of their $6 billion surplus, or and again to push the state to use some of the federal funds that we'll receive to provide additional relief so that every individual left behind from relief has access to this direct cash payment. So that's that story. And then I just quickly want to go into the next campaign, which is occupational licenses. And this is, again, a story about a policy that was really important for our members to win, and also shows the impact of sort of building campaigns and building leadership among, building leadership over the long term. As the Trump administration ended the DACA program, New Jersey young people came together to push for access to in-state financial aid. It used to be in New Jersey that if you were undocumented or if you had DACA, you had to pay out-of-state tuition. Young people fought and were able to win in-state tuition, but they had no access to financial aid. And so young people came together and fought and won access to in-state financial aid back in 2018. And as we were implementing that program, conducting financial aid clinics across the state to thousands of young people to help them apply for financial aid, we met college students and other youth leaders that joined our organization and joined our movement, and they found additional barriers to obtaining the career that they wanted. And one of those barriers was access to occupational licenses. So our youth went through and found that of the more than 200 occupational licenses in New Jersey, including social work, including medical license, a license to become a hairdresser or cosmetics, to become a midwife. Individuals without lawful status or who had DACA were barred from receiving licenses, even if they had completed all of their training. And this was really, for young people who were finally able to go to college because they had won this campaign to win financial aid, to win in-state tuition, this became a further barrier in their path. And so they came together and did a ton of research and worked and pushed and were able to come up with state legislation to remove any barrier based on immigration status to the more than 200 occupational licenses. And the campaign was going before the pandemic, and we found that during the pandemic, we actually had an extraordinary opportunity to push. This is an op-ed written by one of our youth leaders who's a nursing student and who volunteered during the pandemic to provide medical assistance. We were able to create enough pressure to pass legislation right in the middle of the pandemic, gaining support of different healthcare associations, employer-based associations, labor unions that represented individuals in frontline work, including the healthcare industry, to pass legislation that removed all immigration status requirements so that individuals who have done their training and are able to pass the required tests are now able to access an occupational license. And this is the day that the bill was signed virtually, and a really exciting moment for some of our youth leaders, Erica and Andrea, who joined the organization actually when they were in high school to fight for access to in-state tuition and financial aid. And then, as college students took on this campaign and are, I think one is heading to medical school next year. And because of this law, she'll be able to pursue an occupational license. So Again, this is a campaign that continues. There are barriers that we wouldn't have known about but for the leadership of the young people that are trying to access these licenses or working through the different barriers. And it's a campaign that we'll continue to fight for. So I'll stop there. I wanted to also just share our platform. If folks are interested, it's called the Respect and Dignity platform, and it has a whole other layer of campaigns that we're working on and policy proposals on a whole different host of issues that I hope you'll consider. And thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Sarah. Andrea McChristian from the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. We're looking forward to hearing from you. And please, any participants, please put your questions in the chat.
Great. Thank you so much, Kiki, and thank you to Linda and the Center for the invitation to speak with my esteemed colleagues on today's panel. So I'm the Law and Policy Director at the New Jersey Institute for Social Justice. We are a legal policy and advocacy organization based in the mighty city of Newark, New Jersey, that works to build reparative systems and structures in communities of color in the Garden State. So over a year ago now, our nation and the world watched as the murders of Breonna Taylor, George Floyd, and so many others sparked a racial reckoning in our country that was a long time coming. Much like how the Newark Rebellion over 50 years ago was sparked by police abuse of a Black cab driver, the murders of unarmed Black people by police became the final straw after 400 years of racist policies and practices that have been embedded into our nation's foundation. And these cracks of structural racism in the foundation have taken hold very deeply right here in the Garden State. And I'm going to pull up my screen. Hopefully everyone can see this. So Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. once said that you don't have to see the whole staircase, just take the first step. Well, here in New Jersey, we can see the entire staircase of stark racial disparities that harm New Jersey's Black communities and are some of the worst in the nation. For example, New Jersey has the highest Black to white infant mortality death rate in the country of over 3 to 1. 62% of incarcerated people denied the right to vote are Black, even though Black people make up only 15% of the population. The Garden State is also home to the nation's highest Black to white incarceration disparity rates in both its adult and youth facilities. A Black New Jersey resident is 3 times more likely to face police force than a white resident. We are the 6th most segregated state in the nation for Black students, and we have one of the nation's starkest racial wealth gaps right here in New Jersey. While a white family's median net wealth is $352,000, the highest in America, it's only $6,100 for a Black family in New Jersey. So those are the disparities that have taken a very deep hold here in the Garden State. But we don't just want to stop at addressing the issue. What can we do to address and repair these inequities? So seizing this powerful moment in time, everyone can see that, the Institute created the document on the screen now, the 2021 through 2022 agenda to make Black lives really matter in New Jersey. And I know I sent that to Linda earlier, so hopefully we're able to get that resource out to you as well. Now this year, every seat in New Jersey's legislature is up, as well as the governor's seat. And at this critical moment in time, we must make sure that those elected officials who represent us don't just proclaim Black Lives Matter as a platitude, but instead commit to making meaningful investments here in New Jersey to repair the cracks of structural inequity that have erupted into earthquakes in our communities of color. We thus create this agenda to arm all advocates, including all of you on the call, with the tool to make our elected officials work for you, to work for your vote, and to commit to the work of doing racial and social justice. And as you'll see, the agenda is broken into 5 sections, and I'm just going to highlight a few campaigns within the agenda that we could use support on. So first section, closing the racial wealth gap. One way we can work to close the racial wealth gap, which is something that I'm sure affects many on this call, as it affects me, is student loans. Here in New Jersey, we're one of the top 5 states in the country for student loan debt levels, with an average graduate leaving school with $34,387 in loans. But we know nationally, Black students are more likely to take on student loans, borrow in larger amounts, and default on their loans than their white peers. A lack of transparency at the state level means we have no real sense of how student loans impact New Jersey's Black and brown and other students of color. Again, as one of the states with the largest racial wealth gaps, it's critical that we understand how disproportionate debt burdens impact this racial divide. Just a few hours ago, A5380, which would require the state to publish student loan demographic data, advanced out of the Assembly Higher Education Committee after powerful testimony by my colleague Sara and current college students subjected to staggering debt amounts. We're diligently working to advance this bill through the legislature, and you can visit our website at njisj.org to learn more. Next, we turn to transforming the youth justice system. Our state's youth justice system is really fundamentally broken. This year, New Jersey will spend over $400,000 to incarcerate each young person in a state youth prison. And this exorbitant spending is coming at a time when our youth prisons are 75% empty, yet staffed as if at full capacity with over 500 workers. And again, the system is racialized. As I mentioned, New Jersey has the highest Black to white youth incarceration disparity rate in the nation. As of May 6th, only 80 kids are incarcerated across our state's 3 youth prisons. Of those 80, 50 are Black and only 9 are white. And I want to emphasize how low our numbers are. We've done a very great job as a state at reducing our numbers of incarcerated youth, but we've both seen the racial disparities explode because of that and seen how financially wasteful our system is, where as of May of this year, only 2 girls are incarcerated in the girls' youth prison. And with around a quarter of young people released from these facilities ending right back up there where they started within 3 years, we know that there has to be a better way, a better investment. Thankfully, there is. The Institute and our partners are currently advocating for passage of A710, S315, which would create restorative justice hubs and enhanced reentry services in 4 cities disproportionately impacted by youth incarceration: Camden, Newark, Patterson, and Trenton. Please, if you're interested in learning more about transforming our state's youth justice system, you can visit buildupkidsnj.org to tell your local legislators and the governor to pass this important bill. And this is only a first step as we continue our ultimate fight of closing all 3 of our state's youth prisons and reinvesting meaningfully into communities through our 150 Years is Enough campaign. Next up on our agenda, we have keeping communities safe. We know that the world likely would not know the name George Floyd without the bravery of teenager Darnella Frazier, who recorded this terrible murder. Over the past year, conversation has turned to what is needed to reform law enforcement, yet at the Institute, we've really taken a different approach. First, on one hand, we know that we need to import accountability into policing. With that, we just released a policy brief last week in partnership with the New Jersey ACLU to call on New Jersey's Attorney General to create a First Amendment policing policy to protect citizens' rights to record law enforcement interactions. Please visit our website to read this important policy brief. But we believe we also have to look beyond policing. What we believe is needed instead is to look at innovative ways to reduce law enforcement's footprint in our lives, to prioritize what well-funded resources the community needs to feel safe. And that looks like mental health first responders, restorative justice practices, as I just mentioned, and community reinvestment. And we're also working diligently to ensure democracy for all. We recently launched a campaign, Democracy in a Day, to advocate strongly for the passage of same-day voter registration in New Jersey to expand our democracy. And you can visit our website for more information on the bill we are advocating for, A4548, S2824. And under the leadership of my colleague, Henel Patel, we join with partners to successfully advocate for the passage of early voting in New Jersey and are now working towards implementation. We're also setting up the foundation with Kiki and others to ensure that racial justice is imbued within the upcoming redistricting process. Which brings me to our last advocacy section, repairing the harm of racism. Because what does everything I just noted really speak to? Saying the word, reparations. We know it's controversial, but when we speak about reparative justice, we're speaking about repairing the harm that for generations has made New Jersey's Black community subject to the horrible racial disparities that we just saw in the staircase. To that end, I'd like to conclude my remarks by inviting you all to join the Institute, the People's Organization for Progress, and our partners, including NJPP and Make the Road New Jersey, at our Say the Word Reparations rally on Juneteenth in Newark at noon at the Lincoln Memorial. You can also visit 400yearsnj.org to understand how to support the legislation we're advocating for at that rally, A711, S322, which would create the New Jersey Reparations Task Force. You can learn more about the rally on our work at njisj.org. And I'd like to thank you all so much, and I look forward to any of the questions that you may have. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Andrea, and thank you to all our panelists today. That was really terrific. We have some questions that are bubbling up in the chat, and the first two are focused on, I think, primarily on organizations that don't always engage in policy work. And they're asking, how do you get support from board members to help organizations become more active and effective advocates? One question was about just managing, taking a more public stance and worried about how that might affect fundraising. Another question was about hiring people, somebody to work with folks who are being served in order to elevate their voices, the voices of those most directly affected by the policies at issue. Do any of you have advice?
I can start. I mean, I think it's very effective and important to have an organizational theory of change, to be able to, whether it's staff or leadership or the board members themselves, to be able to sort of articulate what the organization's role is and how you see change coming about in your community, your state, wherever sort of population you serve. And so for example, for NJPP, we have a theory of change that is involves a lot more than just us, but we believe we are an integral part of how that change occurs. And so we think that mobilizing is important. We think that working with lawmakers is important. We also think that research is important so that we understand what it is we're actually talking about, and that we can bring some facts to back up people power. And once you sort of have a clear sense of what your theory of change is, then you can sort of understand how your organization fits into that. With regards to
Brandon, let me stop you though. Let me just jump right in and interrupt if I may. When you talk about a theory of change, it sounds like you're talking about things outside the control of your own organization that needs change. Are you talking about identifying changes in structures or policies that are required, or what are these things that need then to be theorized?
So when I think about when I say theory of change, I mean how do we change laws? How do we change practices, structures, all that, right? So to be very discreet about it, even take $15 minimum wage campaign that we engaged in deeply with Make the Road just a few years ago. That was a 6-7 year long campaign. It changed. There were ebbs and flows in that campaign. There were times where, at the beginning of that campaign, $15 was deemed to be an insane amount of money. And now you have people come back to saying to us, all you got was $15, that's it. It needs to be 20. But we figured out, what do we believe is the necessary pathway to victory here? How do we produce research that can then be leveraged by advocates and by those who do organization and mobilization of community, and then how can that pressure be built over time to then honestly force lawmakers and legislative leadership to the table for negotiation around a shared set of facts. All that is our theory of change as an organization, is that it takes all that together to get to where we want to go, or at least in part. But I can definitely talk about that for ages and ages. But I think really it is important to have a sense of that. And just quickly, with regards to the concern about fundraising, that is a common concern of board members, as a common concern of boards. I think as an organization, you have to be very clear about what your values are. And if you're clear about what your values are as an organization, people will find you. Right, the folks who agree with you, the folks who share those values, the folks who want to see the world that you want to see will find you. But you have to be very compelling and clear about what your values are. And even I became president 2 years ago of NJPP. We sort of shifted how we communicate and how we show up in the world. And there was concern that we would lose some funders, and we did, but we gained others. And we have I would say, a stronger foundation now because of it.
Sara or Andrea, ideas about how to engage board members or how to address concerns they may have?
I'm not sure I can speak to the board issue, but I do think in terms of just getting involved with advocacy efforts, I think I would look to coalition spaces. I mean, I think like the effort around the census is a great example of nonprofits that may not have been part of organizing or advocacy work in the past joining in, because we know that the census will determine funding, programs, representation for a decade. I'm thinking also about the Budget Coalition, the For the Many Coalition that's led by NJPP. That's a really important space where organizations that, you know, are traditional advocacy organizations, but also service-based organizations can find a lot of common ground and, you know, are often fighting for the very programs that many nonprofits are administering. And so I think that is a really important sort of first step for organizations that are starting to join. And a lot of these coalitions also provide training on organizing, on popular education, on how to build leadership among constituencies. And, you know, I think that's a great way to plug in.
Sure, and I guess just in addition to what Sara just said, just to echo what Brandon said, we took a lot of time as an organization to develop our theory of change and to make sure that board members were aware of kind of the mission, where in our theory of change is 5 steps. And I actually had all 5 steps in my earlier comments, but I had to cut it down to fit for time. But we go to the community first and foremost to understand what the issues are. Then we turn what the community concern is into policy proposal driven reports that outline the issue, how we got here, and how we can get out of this. We then use public education to inform the community and mobilize them around this narrative we need to push into legislation through executive action and then towards implementation on the other side. And so when there is an issue that's more controversial, we're able to then turn to our theory of change and say, hey, this came from the community, or this is what we found out by researching our policy proposals is needed and what works. And so making sure everyone's bought into everything that we're doing is grounded in our values, that, you know, makes it easier. I will say that, you know, the past year racial reckoning has brought in different, you know, a funding environment where people are kind of willing to fund and look at more bold proposals because they see that it's more needed. And so I think, one, just the changing times has been really powerful for people kind of stretching their ideas of what advocacy, what racial justice, what social justice can actually look like as well.
Thanks very much. How do you address the folks who, particularly nonprofit leaders, who are feeling so stressed and just overstretched in these times, to carve out space to be a good partner on advocacy and on policy? Where can people start if they're working at an organization that's not primarily focused on systems change?
And I'll just jump in again. I think what all of our organizations have done a really good job at is producing public education materials. So if you're not really familiar with an issue, being able to pick up a pamphlet or go to a website and understand, oh, okay, let me get this background, and oh, I can sign up for this action alert, or I could submit a slip of support for testimony. So it's not that we expect you to necessarily be steeped in the whole issue and be an expert in what we're doing, but meet us where you are, meet the advocacy where you are. If you have 5 minutes to call your legislator, if you're able to show up to testify, if you can go to a rally, that's the first start with getting involved. And, you know, I think we all understand burnout and stretching yourself too thin, but just starting a little bit, I think is really important to developing your whole body of advocacy.
The only thing I would add to that, and I agree with everything Andrea said wholeheartedly, you know, not every organization is built to do the same thing. That's not how it's supposed to work. And so understanding who, you know, is doing what in what space, and if someone's doing work in an area that you want to know more about, you know, reach out and say, hey, can you come do a presentation? You know, at least can I talk with you for an hour, just to ask. Researchers really love when people ask them about their research, right? They love to know that it didn't just go into like the void and, you know, nobody read it. They love to see that people read their stuff. So if you want to know more about something, just, you know, Google it and, you know, look it up. But when you find someone who's clearly an expert on the issue, do not be afraid to reach out to them and ask them to come do a presentation or have a conversation. That is the whole purpose.
Each of you has
I mean, I think
shared...
also this...
I'm sorry, go ahead, Sara. Go ahead.
I was going to just say, like, the stakes are so incredibly high right now. And, you know, as we're coming out of the pandemic, how we rebuild is so crucial. And so joining in on any efforts about how the $6 billion are going to be spent in our state, whether it's giving more tax cuts to wealthy corporations or providing relief to people that need it, infrastructure programs that is so important to our communities. I think that's, you know, these are really important. Every moment is an important moment, but this in particular feels like a really important time to shape how our state is going to move forward. And so all of your voices are so crucial to sort of, you know, pushing for a real recovery.
One question people have when they're new to advocacy is, how difficult is this to do without being partisan or being overtly political? Is that a tricky line to walk, or is there a lot of space for work if you're not being partisan?
I think there's a lot of space for it because, especially if it's about the issue, you know, if you're not making it about a person, you're not making it about a specific lawmaker, and you're just talking about the issue and what you want to see happen, and you keep it to that. You know, the only time it can become partisan is if you start mentioning specific bill numbers and start saying, you know, call this person's office or things like that. Not even, I think generally I wouldn't consider that partisan, but I think the IRS would. But still, when you're just talking about the issue itself, if you end up being in a situation where a certain party or parties end up supporting your things more often than not, that's a problem for them. That's not a problem for you. You are pushing policies and solutions that you want to see advance, you know, and help, you know, solve the needs of your community. And I think sometimes we get caught up saying, well, you know, these folks over here aren't going to like it. Well, we need to do a better job of identifying what community needs are, what folks expect to see out of their government, what folks expect to see their tax dollars going to. And if someone feels, you know, pressure from hearing that or learning that, that is a them problem.
Thanks. We have a question in the chat about any advice on how to assess and select potential advocacy initiatives. How do you choose what to get involved with?
I mean, I guess I'll just say, I think it depends on what your organization values. Like for our organization, we obviously are trying to build reparative systems and communities of color. And so our theory of change, as I mentioned, goes to the community to figure out what their issues are. So I guess as an organization, you want to be aware of what your constituency values, what they need, and then develop policies that would help and support them. And so I think whether that's through focus groups, whether that's through surveys, just, you know, even something as casual, depending on your organization, in pre-COVID times, having a barbecue and having people come through and asking them questions while they register to vote. There are different ways to engage to figure out what the people you represent need, and then you can kind of build policy and advocacy around that.
Thanks, Andrea. And Joyce Campbell from Task made the really important point earlier that this also is important to view it within a DEIJ lens, to say that listening and really listening and hearing from the people you're serving is an important way to advance racial justice in any of our organizations. We're just about out of time, so any one sentence advice or wisdom you can share with us before we have to sign off?
Make sure you vote. Primaries coming up. Thank you, everyone.
I just say thank you so much, and like, please reach out. We are. I think it's honestly on organizing and advocacy groups to reach out to you more. And so if you want to get more involved or more engaged in organizing or different campaigns and advocacy, we'd love to hear from you, and we should also reach out to you too. So thank you so much.
Yeah, I just echo thank you for the opportunity, and please let us know how we can be helpful. The only thing I'll say is just, you know, if not now, when, you know, we've known a lot of these problems for a very long time. We've known the solutions for a long time. We've made excuses for a long time. I think folks want to stop hearing excuses and want to start seeing their lives improved. So time to do it.
Thank you all so much for taking the time and sharing your experience today. And thank you to the Center for hosting this conversation. The contact information for Andrea, Sara, and Brandon is available, and I hope everyone will take advantage of those emails and phone numbers to reach out to them and to figure out how to get involved in some of the many coalitions and campaigns that have been discussed here today. Thank you, and I'll flip it back to Linda.
Thank you so much, Kiki, and thank you, Sara, Brandon, Andrea, for this tremendous discussion. A lot more we can do and will do together. This deck and any of the information that our panelists shared will be made available after the session, but here are the websites for each of the organizations on our panel. If you did not have the chance to take part in or listen to the webinar that we did last week, utilizing nonprofit power for anti-racist action, that is available on YouTube. Very powerful session led by Yvette Murray of YRM Consulting and Keith Timko of the Support Center. So encourage you to check that out. Remember, every other Monday, the center does Member Mondays. It's an unscripted networking session for members to talk about whatever is on your mind. So please join us every other Monday for that. We are on social media. Feel free to follow us on all of these platforms. But above all, let me again thank Brandon, Andrea, Sara, and Kiki for again sharing your time, expertise, and for your incredible leadership in the state. Thanks to all of you for joining us and for all of the work that you are doing in New Jersey every day to make our communities better and stronger. We look forward to staying in touch, and we will talk to you soon. Thank you again.